January 29th, 1945. A frozen Belgian village called Holzheim. A man walks around the corner of a farmhouse. He stops, and the air leaves his lungs. 90 German soldiers are staring back at him. Half of them are holding rifles. The other half are reaching for weapons piled on the frozen ground. 4 of his own men are kneeling in the snow, hands behind their heads, faces white with terror. 20 minutes ago, those Germans were prisoners. Now they are free, armed, and organizing to attack his company from behind. A German officer steps forward, shoves the muzzle of an MP-40 submachine gun into the American's stomach, screams something in German. The American doesn't speak German. He is 5 feet 5 inches tall, 140 pounds. Before the war, he worked as a store clerk in a steel town outside Pittsburgh. He is 28 years old, and he has exactly 1 Thompson submachine gun slung over his right shoulder. Not in his hands, not ready to fire, just hanging there like a bag of groceries. The German screams again, louder, his face turning purple, and the American does something that nobody, not the German officer, not the 4 American guards on their knees, not the 90 armed soldiers watching, expects. He starts laughing, not a nervous chuckle, not a desperate giggle, a full, deep, body-shaking laugh, the kind of laugh you'd hear in a bar after someone tells the best joke of the night. The German officer's face twists. Confusion first, then rage. He jams the gun harder into the American's gut, screams a 3rd time. The American laughs harder. What happens in the next 60 seconds will kill 21 men. His name is Leonard Alfred Funk Jr., and by the time the smoke clears from his Thompson submachine gun, he will have earned the Medal of Honor for one of the most violent close-quarters engagements of the entire Second World War. But here is what you need to understand before we go any further. That laugh, that impossible, insane, suicidal laugh, did not come from nowhere. It was not madness. It was not a death wish. That laugh was forged across 3 countries, 3 combat jumps, and 18 months of the most savage fighting the European theater had ever seen. To understand why Leonard Funk laughed when he should have surrendered, why that laugh became the deadliest sound of World War II, we need to go back. Not to the farmyard, not to Belgium. We need to go back to a time when America didn't have a single paratrooper, when the entire concept of jumping out of an airplane to fight behind enemy lines was considered, by most reasonable people, to be completely insane. We need to go back to the factory that built Leonard Funk, because those 60 seconds in Holzheim, they were the final product of a system that took ordinary American men, clerks, farmers, factory workers, and ran them through a gauntlet of selection, training, and combat so intense that the person who came out the other end bore almost no resemblance to the person who went in. And this is the forensic audit of that system, from the first test jump over a Georgia airfield in 1940 to the moment a store clerk from Pennsylvania stood over 21 dead Germans and said the only thing he could think of, that was the stupidest thing I've ever seen. How does a democracy that barely had an army build the deadliest paratrooper in history in less than 4 years? Let's find out. Part 1. The factory. How America built a weapon. It didn't know it needed. Here's a number that should make your jaw hit the floor. In August 1940, the United States Army had exactly 48 paratroopers. Not 48,000, not 4,800, 48 men. A test platoon. Volunteers from the 29th Infantry Regiment at Fort Benning, Georgia, wearing football helmets and repurposed Air Corps parachutes, climbing aboard a Douglas B-18 bomber to jump out over Lawson Field like a science experiment that nobody was sure would survive. Lieutenant William Ryder and Private William King, the first officer and the first enlisted man to officially jump as paratroopers in the history of the United States military, on August 16th, 1940. Remember that date, because 4 years later, the force they helped create would drop over 100,000 men behind enemy lines across Europe and the Pacific. But in August 1940, nobody knew that was coming. In August 1940, the American military was watching from across an ocean as the German Fallschirmjäger, paratroopers, rewrote the rules of warfare. They had jumped into Norway. They had jumped into the Netherlands, 80 of them, in gliders had captured the Belgian fortress of Eben Emael, a position that 1,000 defenders were supposed to hold indefinitely in less than 24 hours. The British and French were stunned. The Americans were taking notes. Now here's the context most people forget. The US Army in 1940 was tiny. It ranked 17th in the world in size, behind Portugal, behind Romania. The entire active duty force was roughly 174,000 men. Germany had nearly 7 million under arms. American soldiers were training with wooden rifles and trucks with tank painted on the sides because there weren't enough real tanks to go around. And yet, within this undersized, underfunded army, someone had the audacity to say, let's build an elite force that jumps out of airplanes, lands behind enemy lines, and fights surrounded until they win or die. Think about the insanity of that pitch. Imagine you're a young American man in 1941. Your country just extended the draft. You're going to learn to march, shoot a rifle, dig a foxhole, standard stuff. And then someone puts up a poster, the rough translation from military bureaucraties. Would you like to volunteer to jump out of a perfectly good airplane at 1,200 feet, land in enemy territory with no tanks, no heavy artillery, no supply lines, and fight an army that surrounds you on all sides until reinforcements arrive, which might be days? The line to volunteer went around the block. Why? Money helped. Paratroopers received an extra $50 a month, jump pay. In 1942 dollars, that was significant. A private's base pay was $50. Jump pay doubled it. For men coming out of the Great Depression, men who'd watched their fathers lose homes and dignity, $100 a month meant something. But $50 a month doesn't explain volunteering to jump out of an airplane into enemy fire. The real reason was simpler and harder to quantify. These men wanted to prove something to themselves, to the world, to the country that had spent a decade grinding them down in poverty. They wanted to be the best, and the army was about to make absolutely certain they regretted that desire for the next several weeks. The training pipeline was designed, deliberately, scientifically, without apology, to break you. Ground week, tower week, jump week, 5 weeks of running until you vomited, climbing until your arms gave out, falling until your body forgot what standing felt like. The physical standards were brutal by any measure. Men who'd survived Depression-era poverty, who'd worked in coal mines and steel mills, who thought they knew what suffering meant, quit. The washout rate, depending on the class and the source, ran somewhere between 30 and 50%. And here's the part they don't tell you in the recruiting poster. The men who quit weren't weak. Plenty of them went on to serve with distinction in regular infantry, in armor, in artillery. They fought and bled, and some of them died. The men who washed out of airborne school weren't failures. They were just normal. The pipeline wasn't looking for normal. It was looking for something specific, something the psychologists of the era couldn't quite name, but could measure. The volunteers who survived, the ones who made it through ground week without quitting, through tower week without freezing, through jump week without refusing, shared a trait, not fearlessness. That's a myth. Every single one of them was terrified the first time they stood at that open door with 1,200 feet of nothing between them and the Georgia clay. The trait was tolerance. Tolerance for fear. The ability to feel the terror and act anyway. To stand at the door, feel every cell in your body screaming, "Don't jump," and jump. Remember that trait. Because it's going to show up again, in a farmyard in Belgium, with a gun pressed against a man's stomach, and 90 armed soldiers waiting to see what he does. Now picture the jump itself. You're inside a C-47 Skytrain. The propeller noise is deafening. You're carrying 60 to 80 pounds of equipment strapped to your body. Main parachute on your back. Reserve on your chest. Your weapon, a Thompson, an M1 Garand, or an M1 carbine. Ammunition, grenades, a trench knife, rations, medical kit, maybe a radio. With all this gear, you weigh somewhere around 250 pounds. The jumpmaster opens the door. The wind tears through the cabin. You can see the ground, 1,200 feet below, moving fast. The jumpmaster hooks your static line to the anchor cable and yells, "Stand in the door!" You stand in the door. And then, go! You jump. The prop blast hits you like getting tackled by a freight train. You tumble for about 4 seconds, which feel like 4 years. You are in free fall. Then the static line deploys your canopy. The chute opens with a crack that jolts your entire body, and the world goes quiet. You drift, you oscillate, and you land at approximately the speed of jumping off a 14-foot building. Do it 5 times without breaking anything important, and you earn your silver wings. Leonard Funk earned his wings. He had reported to the induction center at Wilkinsburg, Pennsylvania, in June 1941, 24 years old, 5'5", 140 pounds. His mother had died when he was a boy. He'd spent his teenage years taking care of his younger brother. He graduated high school in 1934, the 5th year of the Great Depression. College was not an option. Jobs were whatever you could find. He found clerk work. The Army physical examiner looked at him and probably wrote admin in the margin. The Army was wrong. Funk volunteered for the paratroopers. He survived the pipeline. He earned his wings, and he was assigned to Company C, 1st Battalion, 508th Parachute Infantry Regiment, a brand new unit, activated October 20th, 1942, at Camp Blanding, Florida. No combat history, no battle streamers, no tradition, just 1,000+ young Americans learning to be paratroopers in the swamps and palmetto scrub of northern Florida. Pay attention to the timeline, because it matters for the audit. The 508th shipped to England in late December 1943. They arrived in Nottinghamshire, and they were folded into the 82nd Airborne Division, the All-Americans. The 82nd was not new. The 82nd had already jumped into Sicily, already jumped into Salerno. They had fought in the mountains of Italy. These men had already killed, already watched friends die in ways that would rearrange their dreams for the rest of their lives. They had learned the difference between training and combat, that awful, unbridgeable gap between jumping into empty air over a practice field in Georgia and jumping into flak-filled darkness over enemy territory. Funk and the rest of the 508th were the replacements, the untested. The veterans looked at them the way veterans always look at new arrivals, with a quiet mixture of hope and preemptive grief. But Funk had something the younger men didn't. He was 27, ancient by paratrooper standards. Most of his squad mates were barely 20, kids from Nebraska, from Brooklyn, from small towns in Alabama. Funk had spent years taking care of his family through the Depression. He knew what responsibility felt like, not the textbook kind, the kind that presses on your shoulders every morning and doesn't let up when the sun goes down. His officers noticed. By the time the regiment was preparing for the biggest operation in military history, Funk was a squad leader. Within months, he would be the acting company executive officer, second in command of 100+ men. But first, he had to survive his first combat jump, and no amount of training at Fort Benning, no number of practice drops over Lawson Field, could prepare him for what was about to happen in the skies over France. Because on June 6, 1944, the 508th Parachute Infantry Regiment would experience the worst misdrop of any American unit in the entire D-Day invasion. Only 25% of the regiment would land within a mile of their assigned drop zone. The rest would scatter across the Cottontown Peninsula like seeds thrown into a hurricane. And Leonard Funk, with a badly injured ankle and a Thompson submachine gun, would find himself 20 miles behind enemy lines, alone, in the dark, surrounded by an enemy that wanted him dead. What happened next would earn him the Silver Star, but more importantly, it would teach him something about combat that no classroom, no manual, no training exercise could ever teach. Something that would echo forward through Holland, through the Ardennes, through a blizzard, all the way to that frozen farmyard. Something about what happens when the plan fails and the only thing left is the man. But that lesson starts at 1,000 feet, inside a shaking aluminum tube, with German anti-aircraft fire turning the night sky into a light show from hell. Part 2. The Crucible, Normandy, Holland, and the Education of a Killer. June 5th, 1944. Somewhere over the English Channel. The sky is full of airplanes. 1,300 C-47s carrying over 13,000 American paratroopers from the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions. Behind them, hundreds more towing gliders, the largest airborne assault ever attempted, and it's happening at night, across a storm-tossed channel, into a continent bristling with guns. The 508th Parachute Infantry Regiment is aboard 117 of those C-47s, 2,056 men. They left from 2 English airfields, Saltby and Fokingham, heading for Drop Zone N, just north of the French town of Pickerville. Their mission: seize and destroy crossings over the Douve River, clear the division area, hold the ground so the seaborne troops hitting Utah Beach at dawn will have room to push inland. Some men pray, some check their equipment for the 20th time, some try to sleep, which is impossible with 60 pounds of gear, and the roar of twin Pratt and Whitney engines vibrating through your bones. And then they hit the coast of France, and the sky catches fire. The German anti-aircraft defenses over the Cotentin Peninsula are thick and overlapping. Searchlights sweep. Flak bursts explode in orange and white, close enough to hear shrapnel pinging off the fuselage. Tracers arc upward like strings of fire, seemingly slow until they whip past at lethal speed. The C-47 is not a combat aircraft. It has no armor, no guns. It is an aluminum tube with wings, flying at 150 miles per hour through a wall of steel. When a flak shell punches through the fuselage, the fragments don't make a neat hole. They scream through the cabin, bouncing off bulkheads, tearing through equipment and flesh with equal indifference. The pilots react on instinct. They're supposed to maintain tight formation at a precise altitude, dropping to 600 feet for the jump run, but the flak is too heavy. Pilots break formation. Some climb, some dive, some accelerate, some turn, and every deviation, every panic-induced course change, scatters the paratroopers further from where they're supposed to land. The 508th gets the worst of it. The after-action reports tell the story in cold, bureaucratic language. Only 25% of the regiment jumps within a mile of Drop Zone N. Let me translate that into numbers you can feel. Imagine you're a logistics company. You need to deliver 2,000 packages to one address, and 1,500 of them end up scattered across a 50-mile radius. That is not a delivery. That is a catastrophe. Entire sticks of paratroopers, the line of men who jump from a single aircraft, end up miles from anyone they recognize. Some land east of the Murderet River, on the wrong side of a flooded plain the Germans had deliberately created as a trap. Men come down in chest-deep water in the dark, 60 pounds of equipment dragging them under, fumbling for a trench knife to cut their risers, while German machine guns open up from the hedgerows. 36 paratroopers from the 508th alone drown on D-Day night. 36 men who survived the training, survived the flight, survived the jump, and die in 4 feet of water because someone on a German staff drew a line on a map and ordered the fields flooded. Others land directly in the middle of German positions. A paratrooper under canopy is a silhouette against the moonlit sky. He can't fight. He can barely steer. Those 30 seconds of drift are the most vulnerable moments of his life. When he comes down among enemy troops already awake and shooting, those 30 seconds are his last. But here's the paradox of the misdrop, and this is the part that matters for our audit. The scattered drop was a disaster for the planners. It was a masterclass for the Germans' confusion. The Germans were ready for a concentrated airborne assault. They had defenses positioned around the obvious drop zones. What they were not ready for was paratroopers appearing everywhere. 2 men in a ditch here, 10 men behind a hedgerow there, small groups popping up across the entire peninsula, hitting from every direction, cutting telephone lines, ambushing patrols, creating the impression of an invasion force far larger than it actually was. An Air Force historical study on the operation captured a devastating truth. Isolated paratroopers without organization were quickly destroyed by small German units with unit cohesion. But those who found each other, who rallied around a sergeant, a lieutenant, or just the nearest man with a weapon, became something incredibly dangerous. And this is where Leonard Funk's story separates from everyone else's. He lands hard. His ankle twists on impact, badly sprained, possibly fractured. The pain is immediate. A spike of white light behind his eyes with every step. He is 20 miles from drop zone N, 20 miles of German-held territory, in the dark, alone, with a broken ankle and a Thompson. Now a lot of men, brave men, good men, would find a hiding spot, a barn, a ditch, a hedgerow, wait for daylight, assess the situation. Nobody would blame them. In the chaos of the misdrop, survival was its own accomplishment. Funk doesn't do that. He buries his chute, checks his weapon, starts moving toward the sound of other Americans. Within hours, he's collected a group of lost paratroopers, men from different companies, different battalions, even different regiments. The American airborne in Normandy was a shuffled deck, and Funk started pulling cards. 18 men. That's the group he assembles. 18 strangers in the dark, all of them disoriented, all of them scared, all of them looking at this compact, quiet sergeant with the busted ankle and thinking, this guy seems to know what he's doing. Now here's a detail from the official Silver Star citation that the competitor's version gets wrong, and it matters. The citation states that Funk acted as lead scout after 3 scouts had been lost. Think about what that means. 3 men went ahead of the group. 3 men walked point, the most dangerous position, the first to round every corner, the first to cross every field, the first to die if there's an ambush. 3 of them didn't come back, and Leonard Funk, with a fractured ankle, limping through enemy territory, said, "I'll do it. Give me point." For 10 days, he leads this group through German-occupied France, traveling at night, hiding by day, fighting when they have to, avoiding contact when they can. They link up with Allied forces on June 17th. Every single one of the 18 men survives. Not one casualty under Funk's leadership. 10 days, 20 miles of occupied territory. 3 scouts lost before he took over. 0 lost after. Silver Star, Bronze Star, first Purple Heart. And here's the number that tells the real cost. The 508th Parachute Infantry Regiment went into Normandy with 2,056 men. By the time they returned to England on July 17th, only 995 came back. 1,061 casualties, 307 killed in action. Half the regiment, gone, in 6 weeks. The men who survived Normandy were not the same men who'd left England. They had crossed a line that can never be uncrossed. They had learned things about combat that no training manual could teach. Things like, plans are worthless the moment the first bullet flies. Things like, the only person you can count on is the man next to you. Things like, hesitation kills, but so does stupidity, and the line between boldness and suicide is measured in milliseconds. Funk learned all of this, and he got exactly 2 months to rest in England before the next jump. 2 months. That's all. Let me put that in perspective. Today, soldiers who experience a fraction of what the 508th went through in Normandy receive months of psychological evaluation and mandatory stand-down periods. In 1944, the Army gave them 60 days, shipped in replacements to fill the holes in the roster, replacements who would now be the new guys, the untested, the ones the Normandy veterans would look at with that same mixture of hope and grief, and started planning the next operation. Because in September 1944, Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery had an idea. Audacious, brilliant, and possibly insane. Drop 35,000 airborne troops into the Netherlands to seize a chain of bridges across the Rhine and its tributaries. Open a highway for British armor to thunder straight into Germany's industrial heartland. If it worked, the war could be over by Christmas. The operation had a name. Market Garden. September 17th, 1944. The 508th jumps into Holland. This time, the drop is perfect. The regimental commander will later write that they could not have landed better under any circumstances. 90% of the regiment assembles within 90 minutes. The contrast with Normandy is almost surreal. Clean, precise, textbook, as if the chaos of June 6th had been a bad dream. The 508th's mission: secure the Grosbeak Heights, defend the landing zones for the gliders that will follow, and, if possible, seize the massive highway bridge over the Vaal River at Nijmegen. The first objective falls quickly. Limited resistance. The Groesbeek Heights are secured by nightfall. But the bridge at Nijmegen is another story. When the 508th finally sends troops toward it that evening, German SS units have arrived from the north and dug in around the approaches. The paratroopers are stopped 400 yards from the bridge. It will take 3 more days, and one of the most legendary river crossings in military history, to finally capture it. But the real crisis for the 508th comes the next morning. And it's the crisis that earns Leonard Funk his second highest decoration. September 18th. The Germans counterattack hastily assembled units, regular army, Luftwaffe ground personnel, NCO school students, rear echelon troops with rifles shoved into their hands, surge out of the Reichswald forest to the east. They overrun Drop Zone T, where the next wave of Allied gliders is scheduled to land in hours. Picture this. Hundreds of men in fragile wooden gliders, no parachutes, no weapons ready, no way to maneuver, are about to land on a field controlled by enemy troops with 20mm anti-aircraft cannons. If those guns are still firing when the gliders arrive, it will be a massacre. The 508th is ordered to retake the drop zone. Now, not in an hour. Now. The regiment attacks across open ground under German small arms and 20mm cannon fire. By 2 in the afternoon, they've cleared the landing zone. 16 German flak pieces captured. 149 prisoners taken. An hour and a half later, the gliders land safely. But Funk isn't satisfied with clearing the zone. Near the village of Vauxhall, he spots 3 German 20mm anti-aircraft guns still firing at incoming Allied aircraft. These guns are dug in on high ground, with interlocking fields of fire defended by approximately 20 German soldiers behind sandbags and camouflage. Standard military doctrine, the kind taught at West Point and in every war college on Earth, requires a 3-to-1 advantage to assault a prepared position. 3 attackers for every 1 defender. Funk has 3 men, total. He's outnumbered roughly 7-to-1. The wrong way. He attacks anyway. Leading from the front, and by now you're starting to see a pattern, Funk and his 3-man patrol assault the position. They kill the security detachment, storm the gun emplacements, neutralize all 3 weapons and their crews. Approximately 20 Germans killed, 4 Americans standing. The Distinguished Service Cross, second highest award for valor in the United States military. 1 step below the Medal of Honor. Funk now has a Silver Star from Normandy and a DSC from Holland. 2 of the rarest combat decorations any American soldier can earn. Most men who receive even 1 are considered heroes for life. But 60 miles to the north, Market Garden is dying. At Arnhem, the furthest bridge, the last link in the chain, the British 1st Airborne Division has walked into a nightmare. 2 SS Panzer divisions were refitting in the area. Nobody expected them. Nobody planned for them. For 9 days, British paratroopers fought with extraordinary courage against an enemy that outnumbered and outgunned them in every conceivable way. 1 battalion reached the bridge and held the northern end for 4 days against everything the Germans could throw at them. It was not enough. About 10,000 men landed at Arnhem. Roughly 2,000 made it back across the Rhine. The rest were dead, wounded, or prisoners. An 80% casualty rate, a bridge too far, entered the vocabulary of military history as a permanent warning about ambition exceeding capability. The evacuation of Arnhem on the night of September 25th was a scene from a nightmare. Royal Engineers rowed small boats back and forth across the Rhine under artillery and machine gun fire, collecting survivors. Exhausted, filthy, wounded men stumbled down to the riverbank in the darkness and climbed into canvas boats that leaked and sometimes sank. Dawn came. There were still hundreds of men on the wrong side of the river, waving, waiting for boats that would never come. More than 6,000 were left behind. And here's what you need to understand about the psychological impact of Market Garden on the American paratroopers who survived it. They had done everything right. The 80 seconds drop was textbook. Their fighting was superb. They held Nijmegen. They held the Groesbeek Heights. They repelled every counterattack. And it didn't matter, because the plan was flawed at a level above their pay grade. and the British at Arnhem paid the price. This taught the survivors something corrosive. Competence doesn't guarantee success. You can execute perfectly and still lose. The system can fail you. The generals can fail you. And when they do, it's your blood that pays the bill. The men who survived Market Garden, American, British, Polish, were left with a terrible lesson. You could jump clean, fight brilliantly, hold your ground against impossible odds, and it might not be enough, because sometimes the plan itself is the problem, and soldiers pay for the mistakes of generals with their blood. The 82nd Airborne came out of Holland battered, but intact. They were pulled off the line in November and sent to camps in France for rest and refitting. They needed time. Time to absorb replacements. Time to repair equipment. Time to sleep in a bed for the first time in months. They were supposed to have until spring. They didn't get that luxury, because on December 16th, 1944, at 5:30 in the morning, the German army launched its last great gamble. And the sound of that gamble, the thunder of 2,600 artillery pieces firing simultaneously along an 80-mile front, would echo all the way to that farmyard in Holzheim. But before we get to the battle, we need to talk about the massacre, because what happened at a Belgian crossroads on December 17th changed something fundamental in the American soldier's psychology. And without understanding that change, you cannot understand why Leonard Funk laughed when every rational instinct in his body should have told him to surrender. Part 3. The Massacre, when surrender became a death sentence. December 17th, 1944. One day into the German offensive, near the crossroads hamlet of Baugny, 2.5 miles south of the town of Malmedy, Belgium, a convoy of about 30 American vehicles is moving south along the road. Battery B, 285th Field Artillery Observation Battalion. These are not frontline combat troops. They're observers, radio operators, technicians, the quiet, essential people who locate enemy artillery positions so bigger guns can destroy them. They carry light weapons. They are not equipped for a fight against anything heavier than a rifle squad. Their convoy meets the spearhead of Kampfgruppe Piper, an SS armored battle group commanded by Obersturmbannführer Joachim Piper, one of the most aggressive and ruthless officers in the Waffen-SS. Piper is 30 years old, fluent in English and French, and already a veteran of Poland, France, and Russia. His force is a battering ram of tanks, half-tracks, and armored infantry racing west toward the Meuse River crossings. He has a timetable. He is behind schedule. He is furious. The engagement lasts minutes. Tanks against trucks. The Americans are overwhelmed. Roughly 113 men surrender. They are disarmed, searched, and herded into an open field beside the crossroads. Hands raised. What happens next is not a battle. It is murder. The SS opens fire on the prisoners. Machine guns, pistols, rifles. Men standing with their hands raised are cut down where they stand. Men who fall wounded are left in the snow. Then, and this is where the horror deepens, individual SS soldiers walk through the field, methodically shooting anyone who appears to still be alive. A pistol shot to the head, point blank, the coup de grace. 84 Americans die in that field. Sergeant Kenneth Ahrens from Erie, Pennsylvania, was among the prisoners. He was shot twice in the back during the initial volley. He fell face first into the snow. He lay there, bleeding, freezing, face down, while German boots walked past him, while German voices gave orders, while individual pistol shots cracked through the cold air as the SS finished off the wounded. He lay there for 2 to 3 hours, not moving, barely breathing, waiting for a bullet that might come at any second. When darkness fell, Ahrens crawled through the snow, through the bodies of his friends, through the field that smelled of blood and cordite and cold. He made it back to American lines and told his story. 43 men survived the Malmedy massacre. 43 out of roughly 113. They survived by the most ancient instinct available to a human being. They played dead. They lay in the snow and waited for the killing to stop, and then they crawled away in the dark. Harold Billow was another survivor. He made it home after the war. For the rest of his life, every Memorial Day, every 4th of July, every Veterans Day, every Flag Day, He planted 84 American flags in his front yard. One for each man who didn't crawl away. Now I need you to hold what happened at Baugny in your mind. Don't let it go. Because the news of this massacre spread through the American army like a brush fire. Within hours, every unit in the Ardennes knew. Within days, the entire Western Front knew. And it changed something. Before Malmedy, there was an unspoken code on the Western Front. Not a formal agreement. Not even a conscious one, but a pattern. If the situation was hopeless, you surrendered. If the enemy surrendered, you took prisoners. Both sides mostly followed the Geneva Convention, not out of nobility, but out of pragmatism. Kill prisoners, and the enemy stops surrendering, and wars become exponentially more expensive. After Malmedy, the code was broken. American units passed the word, "No SS prisoners." Some commanders said it explicitly, others left it unspoken. But the message was clear. If you wore the double lightning bolt insignia, your chances of being taken alive dropped dramatically. And more importantly, much more importantly for our story, American soldiers swore they would never surrender to the Germans. Not after Malmedy. Not after 84 men murdered in a field. Surrender was no longer a rational calculation of survival. It was a potential death sentence. Remember this, hold it tight, because in 6 weeks, Leonard Funk is going to walk around a corner and face 90 armed Germans with a gun pressed into his stomach. And the decision he makes in that moment, the decision that separates a Medal of Honor from a shallow grave, was made here, in December, in the snow, in the echo of 84 pistol shots. Now let's talk about how the war gets to that farmyard. The Battle of the Bulge is often remembered as a single event. It was not. It was a series of overlapping crises unfolding across 100 miles of front over 6 weeks of the worst winter weather in a generation. Hitler's plan was desperate and ambitious. 3 armies, over 400,000 men, more than 1,400 tanks and armored vehicles, 2,600 artillery pieces, crash through the weakly held American lines in the Ardennes, race to the port of Antwerp, split the British and American armies, force a negotiated peace in the West so Germany could concentrate on the Soviets. The initial assault hit sectors manned by green divisions fresh from the States and exhausted veterans parked in the Ardennes, specifically because it was supposed to be quiet. A rest area, a place to heal. The German attack created a bulge 50 miles deep in the Allied lines. Entire American units were cut off. Thousands surrendered. For the first few days, the situation looked genuinely dire. The Allies were, for the first time since Normandy, on the defensive. The 82nd Airborne was pulled from its rest camp and thrown into the breach, trucked to the Ardennes in open vehicles, in below-zero weather, many still wearing their summer uniforms from Holland. No winter coats, no winter boots. Some men wrapped their feet in burlap sacks to keep their toes from freezing off. Let me tell you what below-zero weather means for an infantryman. Your rifle bolt freezes unless you keep it dry, which means it rusts. Machine gun grease solidifies. The weapon jams when you need it most. Your canteen freezes solid. Blood from a wound crystallizes instead of flowing. If you get hit and nobody finds you within the hour, hypothermia finishes what the bullet started. The men of the 82nd dug foxholes in frozen ground that bounced their entrenching tools back at them like the earth was made of concrete. They heated sea rations by holding the cans against their bodies because a fire at night would draw mortar rounds. They slept in 30-minute shifts, if they slept at all, because falling asleep at -10 degrees Fahrenheit could mean not waking up. The division took up positions along the northern shoulder of the Bulge, anchoring a line the Germans never managed to break. They held. Through 6 weeks of the most grinding, freezing, desperate fighting of the entire war, they held. And then, as January turned, the tide shifted. The German offensive was broken. The fuel ran out. The skies cleared. Allied fighter bombers pounced on exposed German supply columns. The logistical miracle Hitler's plan required, capturing Allied fuel depots, reaching Antwerp in a week, never materialized. The mathematics had been impossible from the start. Now it was the Allies' turn to push back. And here's where the audit narrows, where we zoom in from the panoramic view of armies and fronts and campaigns and focus on one company, one sergeant, one morning. Because by late January 1945, the 82nd Airborne had been in continuous combat for over a month. The men were exhausted in ways that go beyond physical fatigue. They had been cold for so long, they'd forgotten what warmth felt like. They'd been scared for so long that fear had become background noise, always there, always humming, like tinnitus. Some men had developed a 1,000-yard stare, eyes open but looking at nothing, seeing nothing except whatever memory was playing on repeat behind the retinas. This was combat fatigue, what we would now call PTSD, and it was eating the division alive from the inside. Into this exhaustion, this grinding psychological attrition, came a set of orders. Simple on paper, devastating in practice. Company C, 508th Parachute Infantry Regiment, received orders to attack a Belgian village called Holzheim. And everything, Normandy, Holland, Malmedy, 6 weeks of frozen hell in the Ardennes, was about to converge on a single morning, a single farmyard, and a single man with a Thompson submachine gun. But before we get to those 60 seconds, I need to show you what happened in the hours before. Because the assault on Holzheim itself, the battle before the battle, is one of the most remarkable small unit actions of the entire war, and it was led by cooks. No, seriously, cooks. That part of the story starts with a dead executive officer and a first sergeant who looked at his roster and made a decision that would have gotten most men court-martialed. Part 4. The 60 Seconds. How a store clerk defeated 90 armed men. Company C is under strength. Badly. The executive officer, the second in command, has been killed. The company doesn't have enough men for the assault on Holzheim. This isn't just an inconvenience. An understrength infantry company doesn't simply have fewer guns. It has fewer scouts, fewer runners, fewer medics, fewer men to rotate for rest. Everyone who's left covers more ground, carries more weight, stays awake longer. It's a death spiral of exhaustion. Funk is now the acting executive officer, the highest-ranking NCO in the company, suddenly wearing an officer's responsibilities. He looks at his depleted roster and does something that only a man with absolute combat confidence would attempt. He walks to the company headquarters tent. Inside are the people who keep a company running, but almost never fire a shot. Clerks, supply personnel, cooks, men whose war, until this moment, has been paperwork and rations. Funk tells them, "You're all infantry now. Grab your weapons. We're taking that village." Think about the faces in that tent. A supply clerk from Ohio, who spent the war counting ammunition boxes. A cook from Georgia who hasn't fired his rifle since basic training. A headquarters typist from New Jersey, who spent the Ardennes campaign typing reports 3 miles behind the line. 12 hours ago, they were in a warm tent. Now a first sergeant with 3 combat jumps and more decorations than most men will see in a lifetime is telling them to grab their rifles and follow him into a fortified village in a blizzard. They follow him. The march to Holzheim is 15 miles, through waist-deep snow, in a driving snowstorm, temperatures well below freezing. German artillery shells burst around them, harassing fire from the flanks. The random impersonal mathematics of high explosive. Each shell is a lottery ticket. You only lose once. They make it. Funk organizes the assault. His clerks, his cooks, his makeshift warriors follow him into the village. 15 houses, Germans in every one, machine gun positions, rifle pits, the kind of close quarters, room to room, building to building fighting that is the absolute worst environment imaginable. No clean lines of fire, no time to think. You kick open a door and you either shoot first or you die. Funk and his men, this scratch force of paratroopers and headquarters personnel, clear all 15 houses. They capture 30 prisoners, 0 American casualties, not one, not a scratch. A company led by a first sergeant, reinforced by cooks and clerks, assaults a fortified village in a blizzard against entrenched German troops, and takes it without losing a single man. Take a moment and think about what that means. Those clerks and cooks didn't suddenly become elite soldiers in the span of a 15-mile march. They didn't transform. What happened was simpler and more profound. They followed a man who radiated competence so completely that his confidence became contagious. Funk didn't give them speeches. He didn't give them pep talks. He gave them something infinitely more valuable. The visible example of a man who knew exactly what he was doing in the most terrifying environment on Earth. When he kicked open the first door and cleared the first room, they saw it could be done. When he moved to the second house, they followed. When he emerged alive, they believed they could too. Leadership by example is a cliché until you watch it work at the point of a bayonet. Other elements of the company capture 50 more Germans elsewhere in the village. 80 prisoners total. They're collected in the yard of a farmhouse. And here is where the mathematics of combat force a terrible decision. Funk looks at his exhausted men. They've been marching and fighting for hours. There's still resistance. Scattered German soldiers in other parts of the village who haven't surrendered. He needs to keep pressing. Every minute he waits gives the enemy time to organize, counterattack, take back what he's won. He can spare exactly 4 men to guard 80 prisoners. 4 men, 80 prisoners. A ratio of 1 to 20. He knows it's not enough. Everyone knows it's not enough. But the alternative is to stop the assault, let the remaining Germans consolidate, and risk losing the village. In combat, you don't get perfect choices. You get a menu of bad options, and you pick the one that's least catastrophic. Funk picks 4 guards, 80 prisoners. He heads back into the fight. What he doesn't know, what he cannot know, is that a German patrol is approaching the farmhouse. The official Medal of Honor citation describes their method as a ruse. Accounts suggest these were roughly 20 men wearing white camouflage capes over their uniforms. In the snow, in the chaos of battle, they could pass for American troops in winter gear at a distance. The 4 guards don't realize the danger until it's too late. The Germans overpower them, disarm them, force them to their knees in the snow. Then they free the prisoners. 80 German soldiers plus the patrol. Roughly 90 men. They grab weapons from the pile that the disarmed Americans had stacked. They organize. They know exactly what they're going to do. Attack Company C from the rear, while Funk's troops are scattered across the village, mopping up, not expecting a blow from behind. The German officer begins giving orders. Set up the machine guns. Position the men. Wait for the signal. And then Leonard Funk walks around the corner of the farmhouse. He's come to check on the prisoners. Routine. Make sure the guards are okay. See if reinforcements have arrived. He's not expecting to walk into 90 armed Germans. He rounds the corner and freezes. His 4 guards are on their knees. The prisoners, who should be unarmed and contained, are everywhere, standing, moving, rifles in their hands. Some are still picking weapons up from the pile. Others are already in firing positions. An officer is issuing commands. The German officer spots him immediately. The first sergeant stripes on Funk's sleeve mark him as a leader, a prize. The officer strides forward and shoves the muzzle of his MP-40 submachine gun into Funk's stomach. He screams a command, in German. Funk does not speak German. He has no idea what the man is saying. Could be surrender. Could be drop your weapon. Could be get on your knees. It doesn't matter. The language is irrelevant. The gun in his gut is perfectly eloquent. The officer screams again, louder, face turning red, veins swelling in his neck. Now let me give you the mathematics. Funk is facing approximately 90 armed enemy soldiers. His Thompson is slung over his right shoulder, not in his hands. To bring it into action, he needs to unsling it, grasp the grip, bring the muzzle up, and fire. Under normal conditions, this takes about 2 seconds. Under these conditions, with a gun jammed into his abdomen and 90 men watching, it might as well take 2 hours. He has 30 rounds in the magazine. At the Thompson's cyclic rate of about 600 rounds per minute, that magazine will empty in roughly 3 seconds. Even in the most optimistic scenario, he can hit maybe a dozen men before he needs to reload. A reload takes another 2 seconds. 2 seconds during which he is completely defenseless. The mathematics are overwhelming. Every rational calculation points to one answer: surrender. But Leonard Funk has already decided. He decided 6 weeks ago, when the news about Malmedy reached the 82nd Airborne. 84 Americans murdered in a field, shot while surrendering, finished off with pistol rounds to the head. He will never surrender to the Germans, no matter what. And now comes the moment that would enter the legend of the 82nd Airborne Division and never leave it. According to accounts passed down through the regiment, accounts that grew and solidified over decades of retelling, accounts that are not in the official Medal of Honor citation, but are woven into the fabric of the 508th's memory, Leonard Funk starts to laugh. Not a nervous chuckle, not a bark of hysteria. A real laugh. A deep, body-shaking, full-chested laugh. The kind that makes your shoulders shake and your eyes water. The kind you can't fake. The German officer's face changes. Picture this from his perspective. You are a professional soldier. You have just pulled off a brilliant tactical maneuver, freed 90 of your comrades, captured 4 enemy guards, and you're about to launch a devastating rear attack. You have your gun pressed into the stomach of an enemy NCO. Everything is going perfectly. And then this man, this short, exhausted, outnumbered American with no weapon in his hands, starts laughing at you. Confusion first. The officer's mouth opens slightly. His eyes narrow. This is not a reaction he has ever encountered. He has seen men beg. He has seen men plead. He has seen men go white with terror, seen hands tremble, seen knees buckle. He has seen every shade of fear that a human face can produce. He has never seen a man laugh with a gun in his stomach, then rage. The officer screams a third time, louder, his face turning from red to purple. He jabs the MP40 harder, as if the physical pressure will somehow translate the German words into English. Surrender. Drop your weapon. Get on your knees. Now. Funk laughs harder. He bends over slightly, shoulders shaking. He calls out to his 4 men kneeling in the snow, loud enough for everyone to hear, "I don't understand what he's saying." And then something extraordinary happens. Something that no amount of military training prepares you for. Some of the German soldiers start laughing too. Not all of them. Not even most of them. But a handful. Maybe 5. Maybe 10. Standing in that frozen farmyard, rifles in their hands, watching their officer turn purple with fury while this insane American cackles at him. They can't help it. The absurdity of the scene is contagious. It's the same nervous, involuntary reflex that makes people laugh at funerals. The situation is so far outside the boundaries of anything they've experienced that their brains default to the only available response. Imagine what the officer is feeling now. He's not just losing control of one American prisoner, he's losing control of his own men. Discipline, the bedrock of the German military, the thing that has held the Wehrmacht together through 5 years of war, is cracking in real time. His soldiers are laughing at the spectacle, at him, the authority of his rank, his command, his screaming orders. All of it is dissolving in the sound of laughter. The officer doesn't know what to do. This is the critical detail. For a few seconds, 3, maybe 5, an eternity in combat, the German officer is paralyzed. Not by fear, by confusion. His entire framework for this situation has collapsed. Prisoners surrender. Prisoners comply. Prisoners do not stand in front of 90 armed men and laugh until their shoulders shake. There is no protocol for this. There is no training. There is no response. And Leonard Funk, still laughing, still appearing to be nothing more than a man overwhelmed by the absurdity of his situation, uses those seconds. The official citation, the dry, bureaucratic language of the United States military, captures what comes next in a single, devastating sentence. Pretending to comply with the order, began slowly to unsling his submachine gun from his shoulder. Still appearing to laugh, Funk reaches up toward his Thompson. It's slung over his right shoulder, the standard carrying position for paratroopers. To the German officer watching through his fog of rage and confusion, this finally looks like compliance. The American is surrendering his weapon. Good. Finally. The situation is coming back under control. Funk's hand closes around the pistol grip of the Thompson. He begins to unsling it, slowly, carefully. Every movement calibrated to look exactly like what the German expects to see. A beaten man handing over his gun. The officer relaxes. A fraction. A millimeter of slack in his grip on the MP40. His posture shifts from aggressive to receptive. He's about to have another prisoner, another trophy. The bizarre moment with the laughing is over. Order is restored. He is wrong. Funk moves. One motion. The Thompson swings down off his shoulder. The muzzle comes into line. His finger finds the trigger. The transition from surrender to assault takes less than a heartbeat, the most lethal heartbeat of the entire Second World War. The M1A1 Thompson fires .45 ACP rounds. At the range of inches, not feet, not yards, inches, each round hits with devastating force. The .45 caliber bullet is heavy, wide, and subsonic. It was designed to stop a man with a single impact. The first burst catches the German officer. The official citation says he was riddled. At contact distance, the effect is catastrophic. Funk doesn't stop. The moment he pulled that trigger, he committed to a binary outcome. Kill everyone or die. There is no middle ground, no partial victory. If even one armed German survives with the will to fight, Funk is dead. He pivots. The Thompson sprays an arc across the nearest Germans. The men who had been laughing a moment ago aren't laughing now. Nobody is laughing now. The farmyard erupts. The staccato bark of the .45, the screams, the wet impacts. And while he's firing, he's screaming at his men. Pick up their weapons! Pick up their weapons! The four guards scramble from their knees. They grab rifles from the dead and dying Germans at their feet. Seconds ago they were prisoners. Now they are fighting for their lives. The magazine runs dry. 30 rounds. Gone. This is the moment. The 2-second gap. The most dangerous heartbeats of Leonard Funk's life. He yanks the empty magazine, slams a fresh one in, racks the bolt. Muscle memory. 3 years of training and combat compressed into a motion that happens below conscious thought. The Germans are in chaos. Their officer is dead. The man who was laughing, who had them laughing, is now killing them. Nobody gave orders for this. Nobody knows what to do. The laughter that rippled through the group seconds ago has been replaced by something far more contagious: panic. When an organized force loses its leader, it doesn't think, it fragments. Some men shoot back. Bullets snap past Funk's head. The air fills with lead. At these ranges, measured in feet, the difference between a hit and a miss is fractions of an inch. The random wobble of a barrel, the unpredictable jerk of a trigger pull. One round kills the American soldier standing beside Funk. Funk keeps firing, keeps moving, keeps killing. His guards have weapons now. They're shooting too. The Germans, disorganized, leaderless, caught between a man who won't stop shooting and a crossfire they never planned for, begin to break. The official Medal of Honor citation records the result. In the ensuing fight, 21 Germans were killed, many wounded, and the remainder captured. 60 seconds. 90 armed men. 1 paratrooper with a Thompson, and 4 guards who went from prisoners to combatants in the span of a heartbeat. When the smoke clears, 21 Germans lie dead in the snow. Dozens more are wounded. The rest, more than 40, have thrown down their weapons and surrendered. Again, Leonard Funk stands in the middle of the carnage, Thompson in his hands, smoke curling from the barrel, bodies at his feet, blood on the snow. He looks around at the destruction, the dropped weapons, the wounded, the stunned survivors, and says to his men, "That was the stupidest thing I've ever seen." It is characteristically unclear whether he means the Germans' decision to free the prisoners or his own decision to fight them. The aftermath is almost anticlimactic. Company C secures Holzheim. The recaptured Germans are marched to the rear under much heavier guard. Funk reports the incident to his commanding officer with the same emotional intensity as filing a supply requisition. But the story spreads through the regiment, through the division, through the entire 82nd Airborne. The first sergeant who walked into 90 armed Germans, who laughed until they laughed with him, who turned their confusion into his weapon, who used the oldest trick in the human playbook to buy 3 seconds that shouldn't have been enough, and killed his way out. When the Medal of Honor recommendation reaches Washington, nobody questions it, but the most remarkable part of Leonard Funk's story is not how he fought. It's not the 60 seconds or the 21 dead, or the laugh that may or may not have happened exactly the way the legend tells it. The most remarkable part is what he did when the war was over. Part 5 plus verdict. The quiet. What the deadliest paratrooper did with the rest of his life. September 5th, 1945. The White House, Washington, D.C. President Harry S. Truman places the Medal of Honor around Leonard Funk's neck. Truman is a man who understands soldiers. He was an artillery captain in the First World War, a combat officer, not a desk jockey. He knows what shellfire sounds like from the wrong side. He has a line he uses at Medal of Honor ceremonies, and he uses it often, sincerely. "I would rather have this medal than be President of the United States." It's a famous quote. It's frequently attributed to Truman as if he said it once, in a moment of unique emotion, to one extraordinary soldier. The truth is, Truman said it, or something very close to it, to nearly every Medal of Honor recipient who stood before him. Not because it was a script, because he meant it every time. And then the ceremony ends, and Leonard Funk goes home. That's it. No book deal, no lecture circuit, no movie rights, no political career, no talk show appearances, no exploitation of his fame. The most decorated paratrooper of World War II, holder of the Medal of Honor, the Distinguished Service Cross, the Silver Star, the Bronze Star, 3 Purple Hearts, the French Croix de Guerre, the Belgian Order of Leopold, the Dutch Military Order of William, goes back to Pennsylvania and gets a job at the Veterans Administration, the VA, the enormous, creaking bureaucracy responsible for taking care of America's former soldiers, processing disability claims, navigating red tape, helping men who gave everything get what they were owed, clerk work, the same quiet, unglamorous, essential work he did before the war. In 1950, the Army appointed him an honorary first lieutenant in the reserves, recognition of his service as acting executive officer for Company C. Purely honorary. Funk never went back to active duty. He had done enough. He marries Gertrude. They have 2 daughters. They settle in McKeesport, Pennsylvania, a working-class town, not far from the steel mills of Braddock, where he grew up. A modest house, a modest life, the kind of life that doesn't make headlines. For 27 years, Leonard Funk sits at a desk in the Pittsburgh 5-day regional office and helps other veterans. He rises through the ranks, becomes division chief, good salary, steady hours, a pension at the end. When colleagues ask about the war, about Holtzheim, about the 90 Germans, about the Thompson, he gives them the same answer he gives everyone. Did what I had to do. 5 words. That's all. That's all he ever says. I want you to think about what those 5 words contain, because they are not modesty. They are not false humility. They are a precise description of reality as Leonard Funk understood it. In that farmyard, with a gun in his stomach and his men on their knees, there was only one thing to do. He did it. The extraordinary nature of the act exists only from the outside. From the inside, from behind Funk's eyes, it was simply the next step, the only step. This is the paradox at the heart of the Medal of Honor, and it's one Truman, himself a combat veteran, understood intuitively. The men who earn it almost never feel they deserve it, not because they're humble, because from their perspective, they didn't do anything special. They did the only thing the situation allowed. The heroism isn't in the action, it's in the willingness to be in the place where the only option is the impossible. Leonard Funk died on November 20th, 1992. Cancer. He was 76 years old. They buried him at Arlington National Cemetery. Section 35, grave 2373-4, among the heroes of every American war. At the time of his death, he was the last surviving Medal of Honor recipient from the 82nd Airborne Division in World War II, the last living link to a generation that had built an airborne force from nothing and dropped it across the battlefields of Europe in 4 years. A fitness center at Fort Liberty, formerly Fort Bragg, bears his name today. A highway in Pennsylvania was renamed in his honor in 1995. In May 2023, a post office in McKeesport was dedicated to him. Small monuments in a small town for a man who preferred to be small. Most people have never heard of Leonard Funk. They know Audie Murphy, they know Alvin York, the famous names, the ones who got the movies and the books. They don't know the short, quiet paratrooper from Braddock Township who may or may not have laughed at 90 armed Germans before killing 21 of them with a Tommy gun. So let me give you the verdict of this audit. What happened at Holtzheim? A system happened. a system that started in August 1940 with 48 men on a Georgia airfield and, in less than 4 years, produced soldiers so tactically refined, so psychologically hardened, and so operationally experienced that a single first sergeant with a submachine gun could defeat 90 armed men in under a minute. This didn't happen because Americans are inherently braver than other people. It didn't happen because of genetics or destiny or divine favor. It happened because a volunteer system selected for tolerance of fear. Because a training pipeline filtered out everyone except those who could function under extreme stress. Because Normandy tested them with chaos. Because Holland tested them with ambition. Because the Ardennes tested them with cold and despair. And because Malmedy tested them with a question: what will you do when surrender means death? By January 29, 1945, Leonard Funk had been through every one of those tests. He had been refined by the system into something the German military had no framework to understand. Not a berserker, not a superhero, a professional, a man who had absorbed so much violence, survived so many impossible situations, and accumulated so many millisecond decisions that when the worst possible scenario presented itself, 90-1, a gun in his gut, his men on their knees, his body and his mind executed the only remaining option without hesitation. And those 60 seconds, whether they included a laugh or a prayer or dead silence, became the final output of the most effective soldier production system the world had ever seen. The Germans in that farmyard were not cowards. They were soldiers who had fought across Europe for years. Some were veterans of the Eastern Front. Some were boys dragged into uniform in the final months of a losing war. All of them were armed, but they made the fatal mistake of assuming that an American paratrooper with a gun in his stomach would behave the way prisoners are supposed to behave. They assumed compliance. They assumed the normal human response to overwhelming force. They assumed wrong because they didn't understand what they were dealing with. They were looking at a man and seeing a target. What they should have been seeing was a system. 48 months of the most intensive military development program in human history, compressed into 5 feet 5 inches of scar tissue and muscle memory. The German officer who shoved his MP-40 into Funk's gut was working from a reasonable playbook. In his experience, and by January 1945, German soldiers had extensive experience with prisoners, a man confronted by overwhelming force surrenders. It's rational, it's pragmatic, it's what humans do. But Funk was operating from a different playbook, one that had been rewritten at Malmedy, one that said, surrender is not survival. Surrender is a bullet to the back of the head in a frozen Belgian field. They didn't account for Malmedy, for Normandy, for the 18 months of combat that had burned away everything in Leonard Funk except the core, the irreducible center of a man who had decided, with absolute finality, that he would rather die fighting than kneel in the snow and wait for a bullet to the back of his head. That is the verdict of this audit. Leonard Funk was not born a hero. He was manufactured into one, step by step, jump by jump, firefight by firefight, by a country that didn't even have airborne forces 4 years before he became the most decorated paratrooper in its history. And when the manufacturing was done, when the guns went silent and the medals were hung and the war was won, he went home. He sat at a desk. He helped other veterans fill out their paperwork. He lived quietly in a working-class town with his wife and his daughters. And when people asked about the most extraordinary 60 seconds of the entire Second World War, he shrugged and said, "Did what I had to do. 5 feet 5, 140 pounds, former store clerk, Braddock Township, Pennsylvania, the most decorated paratrooper in American history, and you probably never heard his name until now. If this forensic deep dive meant something to you, hit that subscribe button. It helps this channel reach more people who want to understand the real stories behind the history books. Drop a comment. What moment in this story hit you the hardest? I'll see you in the next one. Because the stories of the men who built the world we live in deserve to be told. Every single one of them.